My name is Horridge. I'm 68 years old, and I was the happiest man in the world the day my daughter was born. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I would experience on her wedding day. Have you ever had your face sunk into a wedding cake in front of 200 people by your daughter's own fiancé? I did. And the worst thing was not the humiliation. It was silence. Her silence. You may be wondering, how does anyone let this happen? How does a daughter let her own father be treated like this? The truth is that there are things that we only understand when it's too late, and others that we already felt but didn't want to accept. I lived a lifetime trying to teach my daughter what really has value: love, respect, character. And in that golden hall, surrounded by rich people, I realized that all this had been thrown away in the name of appearance. But life has its own ways of giving back. Today, I'm going to tell you what happened 5 minutes later and why that cake, with all the icing, turned out to be the best gift I could receive. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. It all happened in a matter of minutes. 1 second I was with a napkin on my lap, trying to smile to please everyone. The next, my face was buried in a 5-tiered cake, while the people who were supposed to call me family laughed shamelessly. My daughter screamed, but it was too late. At that moment, I was no longer the father of the bride. I was just a ridiculous old man covered in icing. Her fiancé, Brandon, thought it was funny. He thought that humiliating someone older, simpler, was a way to show power. But what he didn't know, 5 minutes later, the name he had so despised would echo in that room like an earthquake. Before moving on, if this story has already stirred any memories inside, if you know someone who has been left out, or if you yourself have been treated as if you were worth less just because you seem to have less, I ask from the heart that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me until the end. Not by numbers, but why tell it alone? It hurts more than what happened. And maybe, by sharing, we will heal a little together. I wake up every day before the sun rises. It's an old habit, hard to break, even with no one here at home but me. I like the silence of the morning. I prepare my coffee with precision. 2 level spoons, almost boiling water, unsweetened because of diabetes. As the kettle sizzles, I open the back door to check out my small vegetable garden. There grow tomatoes, basil, carrots that are too short, but tasty. Emily helped me plant when I was little. One day he told me that the earth smelled of hugs. To this day, when I touch the earth, I smell her childhood. My house is modest, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, worn wood, old photos on the walls, but everything has a story. The sofa was a gift from Rachel, my late wife, bought with savings from extra work I did in 1992. The reading chair, the one with cracked leather on the back, Emily picked out with me at a second-hand store when she was 16. "This one looks like you here," she said, smiling. And he really listens. Listen to my low pains, my long thoughts, my silence. I'm a billionaire, yes, but no one who enters here would imagine that. And that's how I prefer it. I live as I did before everything happened. Not out of vanity to seem simple, but out of conviction. Money, in my view, is just a tool. It was never my north nor my shield. It only serves when it helps to build something good. And the most good thing I built in my life was my daughter. Rachel was gone too soon, a cancer that does not forgive, that does not negotiate. Emily was only 8 years old. I remember the day I sat with her on the edge of the bed and explained that Mom was not coming back. She shook my hand and said that we were going to take care of each other, and we take care. She helped me with the market, set the table, brought a blanket when I dozed off reading. It never gave me any trouble. He grew up with a strength that still moves me today. I was everything I could. I took it on the first day of school, on the last, at all the parents' meetings. When she wanted to do ballet, I sold my watch to pay the monthly fee. When I wanted to go to college, I held back my tears at the airport and smiled until she disappeared at the boarding gate. I sent her letters, even though I knew she preferred emails. Every decision I made, every saving I made, every night working, everything was for her. And never, never did I expect anything in return. Just the look, that look that says, "I know who you are, Dad." Is that it? But in recent months, this look has become different. She began to change her tone when talking about Brandon. First it was excitement, then it was more defense, as if she needed to justify something. I listened, smiled, but inside something bothered me. His family was from Greenwich, Connecticut, a world apart. Rich from birth, accustomed to French wine and silent dinners where words are worth less than surnames. They never asked me anything. They never wanted to know who Emily's father was. And she, maybe out of love, maybe out of fear, started to prune me. "Dad, try not to talk too much about politics. Dad, see if you go with that dark blue shirt, okay? Dad, Brandon thinks it would be more elegant for us to have the ceremony in East Hampton, you know?" I listened. He said that was fine. But something inside me was starting to fall silent too. You know, there is a time in life when we don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. But what hurts? That's when those we raised with all love begin to doubt what we are. And allow me to pause here, because maybe you've felt it. That moment when the person you love the most doesn't seem to recognize you anymore, or fit you into a role that is not yours. If this has ever happened to you, write a short sentence here in the comments. It can be, "I've lived it," or "It touched me." Sometimes sharing that pain with others makes us feel a little less invisible. I say it again. I don't hold grudges, but I keep everything in my memory. I've always been like that. And every time Emily asked me to not look too much, I remembered the first time she drew our house with crayons and put a huge sun on top. I was the sun, and now I seemed to be the shadow. The wedding date came as a warning. Everything was ready. The venue would be the Grand Pavilion in the Hamptons, pure luxury. I looked at the invitation and thought if there was room for me in that scenario. I, who never liked champagne etiquette, who still read printed newspapers and ate roast chicken with my hands. Would I be a nuisance, or just a tolerated extra? On the morning of the event, I put on my best suit, the same as dinner with the Whitmore family. Navy blue, well done. I shaved carefully, measured my sugar, put her gift in the glove compartment, a crystal vase with a handwritten card. I left Hoboken early, and on the road, something told me that that day would mark my life in a way that not even time could erase. But what I didn't know is that the deepest pain was yet to come, and that it would come not in words, but in silence, and in the bitter taste of icing. You've prepared your whole life to be worthy, and in the end, did someone treat you like a disposable burden? Well, that's what happened to me, and it all started right on arrival. It was at the engagement dinner that I began to truly understand the kind of people my daughter was marrying. Emily insisted that I go, said it would be important to get to know Brandon's parents better. The restaurant of choice was Le Palais, a place where the waiters move like trained ghosts and the menu is priceless. The kind of environment where education becomes the currency of appearance and everyone smiles with their teeth but never with their eyes. I arrived a little early, as I have always done in my life. I walked in with the navy blue suit that she herself said would be appropriate. But as I waited, I saw in the hall mirror my own image, upright posture, steady hands, calm expression. And yet, something in me said I wasn't welcome there. When they arrived, Priscilla and Eldon Whitmore entered as the owner of the salon. Priscilla had a necklace that could pay for a down payment on a house in Hoboken. Eldon shook my hand with his fingertips and said, "Mr. Green, I've heard a lot about you." I felt that the much there meant enough to judge me. And Brandon, as always, with that corner smile that says nothing and says everything. We sat down. Emily stayed next to me, but closer to them. The conversation started lightly about marriage. I mentioned a pavilion in Liberty State Park, a beautiful place overlooking Manhattan, where I saw a simple but unforgettable ceremony. Priscilla looked at me as if analyzing a crumpled package. "Ah, in the open air," he said, as if he were talking about a barn. Eldon laughed. "You two are so impractical." Then they started talking about the places where they had already been invited in Aspen, the family founding events, a wedding in Napa Valley where the menu had 7 steps. And then they cited, as if it were obvious, the Westfield Grand Hall. "It's the least our family would expect from a Whitmore," Priscilla said. 50,000 just for the space, but it's worth every penny." I smiled, because I know how to smile even when the slap comes politely. And then I said what I could. If I need help with costs, I can contribute whatever I can. It was then that she cut me, as if she were buttering a very fragile bread. "Oh, don't worry. We know your reality." The pause before the word reality hurt more than the word itself. That woman saw me as a man who could barely afford his dinner, and this, for her, was a defect that needed to be camouflaged with condescension. Emily blushed. He tried to bring up another subject, said something about how resourceful I had always been, but Eldon made sure to savor that word. "Ingenious?" he repeated, as if biting into a very expensive lemon. And it was at that moment that I understood that there was no room for me there, not as I am. The waiter came to take the orders. They chose cuts of meat with French names that I didn't recognize. I ordered the salmon. Simpler. And I saw in Brandon's eyes that it amused him. Dinner went on between wines that I couldn't pronounce, and stories that all seemed the same, empty achievements packed in figures. I looked at my daughter and wondered if she saw what I saw, or if he had already become accustomed to the smell of this world, a smell that is not of food nor of flowers, but of superiority. When dessert arrived, a plate that looked like a chocolate jewel with gold leaf on top, I heard Priscilla say, "We were happy to take care of everything. We fully understand your situation." This time he didn't even smile. The only thing I did was look at Emily. She dodged. And there, in that instant, I knew I was beginning to lose my daughter to a world that saw me as something to be tolerated, not celebrated. On the way out, I helped Emily into the car. She thanked me for coming, and I just said, "Sure, honey, it's your moment." But on the way back, alone in my Camry, I repeated this phrase in my head. "It's your moment." And I asked myself, is there room for me in this moment of hers? Or will my time with her, is it over? But I didn't yet know that at that dinner they had begun to dig their own ruin, and that they were about to discover the weight of underestimating a man in silence. Do you know why? Because what Brandon would do on his wedding day was going to reveal more than arrogance. It was going to reveal the kind of man he had always been, and that I had always seen. There was no gold leaf to cover the shame. The week after dinner, I returned home with a knot in my chest that wouldn't untie. I tried to swallow the feeling that something was being torn from me little by little, like when you feel a stream of water carrying, grain by grain, the ground under your feet. And when Emily called me saying she was coming to visit me alone on Saturday afternoon for a moment, I breathed a sigh of relief. I prepared coffee, baked the bread she liked the most as a child, the one with raisins and cinnamon. I took out of the closet a small box lined with blue velvet. It was the gift I had kept for her since the beginning of the preparations for the engagement. A silver necklace with a simple reliquary. Inside, a photo of me and Rachel holding Emily as a baby, wrapped in a handmade yellow blanket. Rachel had her face lit up in that image, and I held our 2 gems as if the whole world could fit there. It was the last photo we took of the 3 of us together before Rachel began treatment. I kept that reliquary for years, waiting for the right day. And if that wasn't the right time, I didn't know what it was. Emily arrived, smiled, said she was in a hurry, but wanted to see the garden. We talked a little about the flowers, she complimented the tomatoes, and before she left, I delivered the gift. He said a few words, only the essential. "This necklace is your story, my daughter, and so did his mother's story. It's all I can give you that's more valuable than money." She opened it, smiled with moist eyes, but said only, "It's beautiful, Dad, thank you." I kept her hug as if keeping a breath. 2 days later, I received a message saying that Brandon's parents wanted to have an informal engagement lunch and that it would be in Greenwich. The invitation came late, as if it had been forwarded out of obligation. I went. I arrived on time, as always. And there they were, all but Emily. She arrived later with Brandon. When she entered, I saw a golden necklace around her neck with a modern symbol, something geometric without a soul. It wasn't mine. She did not use the reliquary. That hit me like a warning. But still, he smiles. During lunch, while everyone laughed at stories that didn't include me, I tried to start a conversation with Brandon. I asked if they had chosen the music for the ceremony. He replied, "Oh, these more emotional things, I leave it to Emily. I only take care of what matters." And he laughed to himself. Then the conversation revolved around the guest list, the flowers, the French buffet. At one point, Emily commented that she would have a small table with photos of her parents. I smiled. And then Brandon blurted out, "Let's just watch the weather. Like nothing too depressing, right? My grandfather sleeping standing up is enough." Priscilla laughed. Eldon pretended he didn't hear. And Emily just touched her fiancé's arm as if to ask, "Not now." He looked at me and said, "Oh, relax. I'm just kidding, Mr. Green. But you understand, right? There are things that are better kept." I didn't answer. I just lowered my eyes to the plate and chewed slowly. But inside, something began to break. And it wasn't anger, no. It was absence. It was the feeling that I was disappearing from one's own history. From that day on, the invitations began to arrive late. The decisions arrived ready, already made. The color palette, the place of tables, the choice of godparents. I was informed, not consulted. When I tried to suggest that we invite Mrs. Hilda, a neighbor from my childhood, who helped take care of Emily when Rachel died, I received a polite response. "Dad, I don't know if it will match the environment." Combine. As if love needed to match. With each detail, I understood more. They didn't want me there. Not really. They put up with me because I couldn't exclude myself without scandal. And my daughter, she didn't seem to see, or not wanting to see it. Perhaps for fear of losing it all. Perhaps out of shame. And it was at that time that I started to write everything down in an old notebook, not because I wanted to hold a grudge, but because I needed to remember who I was. Because if they were going to erase me from the memory of the wedding, I was at least going to record it for myself. I said to myself, "You've been there, Horridge. You loved it. You took care. You built this girl with your hands. And even if today she asks you not to shine too much, you don't have to turn off your light to fit into their world." But still, deep in my chest, I wanted to believe that it was all fleeting, that at the altar, at the time of yes, she would really see me, that the memory of Rachel, of her father's lap, of the rain we took running to the subway, all this was going to reappear, that she would remember who held her when the world fell. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Because what Brandon did on his wedding day, he crossed any line, and Emily's silence after, it was what destroyed me the most. Want to know what happened when I arrived at the Grand Pavilion? You will understand why, on that day, even the cake tasted like loss. It was a Wednesday afternoon, one of those when the wind blows weakly and the sky is cloudy, the way it seems to announce bad things. I was in my backyard, working on the soil in the garden, when the phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice came a little higher than usual, with that tone she used when she needed to ask for something that she knew would hurt me. We talked a little about the wedding rehearsal, about the floral arrangements, and then came the silence. A silence that already said long before the words. It was then that she said, "Dad, can you in marriage try not to talk too much about your life? About what you do, anyway, you know, your stuff?" I stood still, with the hoe still in my hand. She continued quickly, trying to amend with justifications. "It's just that the Whitmores are very traditional. They have another way of seeing things, and I just wanted everything to flow without discomfort. I sat right there, on the wooden stool near the vases. I looked at the floor for a few seconds and replied calmly, "Of course, daughter. It's your day." She sighed in relief and thanked me, as if I had done a great favor. Little did she know what it cost me. Emily doesn't really know about my life. I never knew. She grew up in comfort but without ostentation. I never told you that I made a fortune after investing in a tech startup back in the 90s. I never told you that I am a shareholder in 3 companies listed on the Nasdaq. I never told because it was never part of who I am inside. And I also never wanted that to define who was by my side. I kept my house simple, my old car, my same coats as always, because I believe that those who see value in you need to see it without the decorations. Now, to hear from my own daughter that what I'm needed to be hidden, it was a blow without noise, a cold cut, and not for the money, but because she could no longer see value in what I had become without the sparkles they displayed so much. I remember that night I sat on the sofa in the living room and looked at the old photos. Rachel and I, so young, so full of dreams. Then me and Emily on my lap, with our little feet dangling, and that wide-open laugh of a child who believes that his father can do anything. It was this man she now wanted to keep quiet, invisible, discreet, because otherwise it could spoil the scenario of perfection she was putting together. You know, I'm here opening my heart, telling my story, remembering things that hurt more than an exposed wound. If you're still with me this far, listening to this old man speak with his heart in his hands, leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. It's not for numbers, no. It's to know that there's someone on the other side really listening. Because there are memories that weigh too much to carry alone. After that phone call, I started to talk less. In meetings, I smiled and nodded. When someone asked what I did, I would just say, "I'm retired." I never mentioned the advice, the reports I still write for international funds, or the meetings with CEOs who call me asking for opinions. I preferred silence, because at that moment, I realized that I was being tested too, and I wanted to see how far the blindness of those who only see value when it shines in someone's chest would go. But even though I was silent, I began to observe more. The gestures, the invitations that didn't come, choices made without consultation, the clothes they told me to wear. Even the chair where I was supposed to sit at the ceremony was already set, away from the altar, away from the photos, away from the center, far from her. And each of those little decisions was another brick in the wall they were building between me and my own daughter. Deep down, I knew it was going to fall apart. I just didn't know how or when, but he sensed it. Because when you try to hide who you are, just to fit in the window of others, at some point the truth escapes. And when it escapes, she doesn't ask for permission. Can you imagine what the first sign was that this glass castle was about to crack? I felt it before I even entered the hall, in the eyes of a stranger who recognized me, not by the suit nor by the title, but for something that no one there knew I was carrying. And that's when everything started to change. The morning after Emily's call, I went back to my routine. I woke up early, as always, put the coffee on the fire, and went to take care of the vegetable garden. The smell of wet earth helps me think, or maybe it helps not to overthink it. I knelt there, near the tomatoes, pulling some weeds with my hands already worn, when I found myself unintentionally immersed in memories that I had kept quiet for a long time, hidden in some corner of my chest. The memory of that night when 6-year-old Emily caught severe pneumonia came strongly. Rachel was no more. I alternated between the shift at the hospital and the shift at the office. He slept, sitting in a hard chair, with his head against the white wall, while holding her little hand. With each cough, my body trembled. The day the doctor said she would get better, I cried in the elevator, hidden from the world. I would give my lungs, my life, anything to see my girl well. I also remembered her birthdays. The first, when it was still possible to dream big, but after I became a widower, reality made me recalculate everything. There was a year when I made a simple cake bought at the supermarket and decorated it with colored paper left over from a work project. I cut little stars with blunt scissors and glued them with tape. She loved it. He said it was the best party in the world, and I, silly in that way that a passionate father is, believed it. To this day, I keep one of those little stars in a book of poetry that Rachel gave me before leaving. There was the winter of 2003. That one was hard. Emily dreamed of taking dance classes. I couldn't afford it. I had the budget at the limit, the heater in the house broke and all the bills due. But I knew how much it meant to her, so I sold the car. I spent 2 months walking to and from work, braving the biting New Jersey wind, with my face burning with cold. But she danced. She danced in the recital with that blue dress that shone on stage, and when he finished, he ran to me saying, "Dad, I did it. Did you see it?" I did, my daughter. And it was there that I understood that we don't live for ourselves. We live by what we plant in the hearts of others. All these memories came to me while I was digging, pulling weeds, cleaning dry leaves. I saw myself inside those memories as if time had gone back. But now she preferred the Whitmore house. The marble columns, the scentless halls, the cutlery lined up as if they were welded. Now she worried about whether my suit was too simple, if my presence was going to clash. I, who for so long was the only audience of the dance steps, was now an extra in a show that she wanted to stage for another audience, and it hurt. It hurt without a fuss, a gentle but deep pain, the kind that doesn't make us scream, but that makes us quieter than usual. I went to the garage, opened a cardboard box, where I keep things that no one has ever seen, letters from Rachel, drawings from Emily, newspaper clippings with news of my small achievements. There was the blue ribbon of her first prize at the science fair, a note from her saying, "Dad, you're my hero," and now I was the man she preferred to hide. I spent the rest of the day quietly. I wrote a few lines in the notebook, watered the plants, arranged the dining table even though I knew no one would come. And at the end of the night, I sat on the porch, with a blanket on my legs and a warm tea in my hands. I looked up at the dark sky and thought of Rachel. I asked quietly, did I make a mistake at some point? Have I loved too much and forgotten to teach how to recognize love? The answer did not come, or maybe it came in silence. Because sometimes the world responds with absence. But one thing I knew clearly, I wasn't going to beg to be there. I wasn't going to shrink to fit in a corner that doesn't belong to me. And if my daughter ever saw me again as before, she would have to cross that bridge on her own. I would build it, of course, but he would not walk alone through it. At that moment, I thought that was the bottom of the well, the contained hurt, the silent exclusion. But I was wrong. Because what happened in the Grand Pavilion, it was not just another wound, it was the wound, the one that we take with us for life, even after the blood dries up. Do you want to know how it all fell apart in front of 200 people with cake, orchestra and crystal glasses? So get ready, because the sound of their laughter still echoes in my head to this day. The wedding day arrived with clear skies, dry cold, and a light wind blowing from the north. I woke up before the alarm clock, as always. I didn't sleep much that night, maybe 3 hours between thoughts. I got up slowly, feeling the weight on my legs, the silence of the house, and the smell of fresh coffee that I prepared myself. I drank slowly, remembering the morning of Emily's 7th birthday, when she came running to the kitchen with a paper hat, saying that this would be the best day of her life. She was right. At that time, her happiness was still a simple thing. I wore the navy blue suit with all the care in the world. I ran my hand over my lapels, adjusted my tie in the mirror, brushed my shoes twice. I checked her glucose level, took her medicines on time, and put in my inner pocket the gift I had chosen so carefully. The reliquary she didn't use, now with a new message engraved behind the photo. So that you never forget where you came from. I love you, Dad. It was all I could do. Love in silence. I took the envelope with a check inside as well. High value, tall enough to cover half of the ceremony if that were the case, but that wasn't even what mattered. The gesture mattered, the presence, the name in the corner of the card. I left Hoboken driving my Toyota Camry, the same as always. The car was clean, full, the tank full as if the trip required more than gasoline. It required strength. It took me 3 hours to reach the Hamptons, crossing wide roads, surrounded by trees already half orange. The Grand Whitmore Pavilion loomed on the horizon like a magazine mirage. Immense, gilded, with Greek columns and mirrored windows. At the entrance, Bentleys and Mercedes-Benz parked by white-gloved valets. Men in Italian suits and women in dresses that looked like they came out of a red carpet. I gave the car keys to a young man who barely looked me in the eye. I took my cane, not out of necessity, but out of elegance. The dark wood matched my rhythm. I was directed by a smiling young woman, a protocol smile, to an area called Reserved for Unaccompanied Parents. A small table, away from the garden where the guests took pictures, toasted, laughed loudly. I sat down. I placed the gift on the white towel and looked around. No one came to greet me. None of Brandon's parents spoke to me. I saw Priscilla pass by, looking straight as if I were invisible. I saw Eldon talking on the phone, laughing, disconnected from everything. Brandon appeared surrounded by the groomsmen, adjusting his tie arrogantly, making jokes that drew empty laughter. And then I saw my daughter. Emily was beautiful. Delicate dress, hair tied with small points of light, serene walk. But the look, the gaze was distant. He didn't look for me. He didn't see me, or pretended not to see, and that hurt more than anything else. The official photos have begun. I waited for the call that didn't come. They called the groom's parents. They called the bridesmaids. They called their close friends. I sat there with my hand in my pocket, squeezing the fabric of the suit without realizing it. No one called me. It's strange. We spend our lives building an invisible castle of memories with someone, and suddenly you realize that you have been excluded from the photograph of what you helped create. I smiled, because smiling has become my disguise. But inside, my heart felt like fine ceramic, cracking in silence. I tried to get up, but one of the organizers came to ask me to wait there. In a little while they will call for the ceremony, Mr. Green. Mr. Green. Neither father of the bride, nor potential grandfather, nor part of the family. Just Mr. Green. While I waited, I stared at that absurd place, the hall decorated with white flowers in towers, the waiters with silver trays, the guests with crystal glasses. It was all beautiful, but without a soul. Like a dollhouse set up to impress those who pass by the window. And then I asked myself a question that ran through everything. Did I raise my daughter for this? To be another play in a scenario that requires silence from those who built everything behind? Look, if you've come this far with me, listening to this story carefully, can I tell you something? The most memorable part is yet to happen, because we think we've already seen rock bottom. But the bottom, my friend, he can still give more. And that's what happened to me, because when the ceremony began, I still thought that my presence was enough. My love was enough. I still believed that it was enough to be there. But 5 minutes later, I discovered that no love protects us from humiliation. And what the groom did, well, I never forgot it. And you won't forget it either. The reception had just begun. The orchestra played bass. The waiters circulated with full glasses and trays of appetizers, difficult even to pronounce. I sat quietly at my desk, watching the wide smiles, the loud toasts, the constant flashes. No one came to talk to me, but I had already gotten used to it by then. When they announced the beginning of dessert, I got up slowly and went to the table where the sweets were displayed with such pomp that they looked like jewelry. I looked around, looking for something I could eat. I have had severe sugar restrictions since I was 60, and the doctor had already warned me 1,000 times. I called a waiter politely and asked in a low voice, "Would you have any sugar-free options?" The boy was kind. He said he was going to check. But before he could leave, I heard a voice behind me, loud and full of sarcasm. "Of course! We have pudding from the asylum." It was Brandon. Time stopped for a second. The laughter started gradually. First from the groomsmen, then from the next table. They laughed like someone watching a comedy in bad taste. I felt the eyes of the hall on me. Emily was near the dance floor, watched as she turned towards me. Her eyes passed over me, as if they didn't know if they felt shame or pity. He tried to change the subject with someone next to him, pretending he didn't hear. But he listened. Everyone listened. And even then, no one said anything. Neither did she. I returned to the table with my heart beating slowly, as if I was beaten inside. I stood there for a few minutes, looking at the glass of water in front of me. I wasn't hungry. He had no thirst, just an emptiness that grew inside. I thought about leaving. Take my key, drive home, forget everything. But a part of me wanted to hold on until the end. Perhaps out of pride, maybe out of love. Maybe because of something I can't even explain. I looked at the room again. I saw Brandon helping himself to cake, laughing out loud with his friends, his eyes already shining with alcohol. He was the center of attention, the perfect husband of the perfect party. And me, I was the shadow he wanted to erase. It was then that everything happened. Brandon came walking towards me with a mocking smile, balancing a generous piece of the cake in his hands. It seemed rehearsed, a cheap theatre. When he stopped in front of me, he said loud enough for all to hear, "Hey, Mr. Green, aren't you going to taste the cake? They say it's too good even for the taste of the last century." And before I could answer anything, he shoved the whole piece into my face, with force. The covering spread across my forehead, ran down my nose, into the collar of my shirt. I heard a collective "oh!" An eerie silence filled the hall, but it was short-lived. Emily screamed, a scream that went through the crystal glasses and knocked down the varnish of the party. "Brandon, what the hell are you doing?" People stopped. The music ceased. The waiter knocked over a tray, and I stood there with the covering dripping down my chin, in the middle of my daughter's wedding hall. And yet, even so, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't hit my hand on the table. I just put the napkin to my mouth, slowly wiped each part of my face, as if I were ending any dinner. I looked Brandon straight in the eye. The whole room was waiting for a reaction. And then I said in a firm, calm, heavy voice, "You have made the mistake of your life. It's funny. There are moments in life when we don't need to raise our voices to be heard, because silence, when it carries truth, weighs more than any scandal." And at that time, everyone understood that something was about to change. I wanted to pause here quickly and say something to you who are listening to me so far. When we are disrespected in front of everyone without deserving it, it hurts in a way that words can't explain. It's as if they tore a piece of our history away in front of an audience. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever been humiliated by someone you've helped, that you've trusted, comment there. He says, "I know how it is," or "I understand you," because there are certain pains that we only understand when we have gone through them. And to know that you hear me, that you feel together, it strengthens me. But the most curious thing is that even with a dirty face, even with a wounded soul, I still hadn't finished my part in that story. Because while everyone was still recovering from the shock, while Brandon bragged with his eyes puffed up with cheap wine and rotten pride, I knew the clock was ticking, and that there were 5 minutes left, only 5, so that the name Horridge T. Green would be said by someone none of them expected, and when that name echoed, the salon was never the same again. Are you ready to know what happened next? Because it is now that history turns. I stood there, standing in the middle of the room, with the cake still dripping down the collar of my suit soaked in icing, and a strange feeling that my body was present, but my soul was gone minutes ago. I grabbed the napkin again, finished cleaning what I could, and started walking slowly to the corner of the room, as if not wanting to disturb the party. No one stopped me. No one offered me help. Not a glass of water. Not a glance. It was as if I was a mistake in the impeccable script of that luxury theatre, an inconvenient presence, a stain on the white towel that no one wanted to face. Emily was still there, static, near the makeshift altar. She looked at me, but didn't move. There was a mixture of fright, guilt, and fear. Fear of what that could mean, fear of what others would think, but no step, no gesture, not a word. And I, who had already carried that small body in my arms for so many sleepless nights, was now just the old man with the face dirty with whipped cream and shame. I sat on the edge of a chair, hidden behind a column of artificial flowers. No one saw me there, and maybe it would be better that way. I watched the millionaire decoration. The solid chocolate sculptures in the shape of swans. The $400 wine being served as if it were juice. The cold lights of the chandeliers that didn't heat anything. Everything there had a price. Everything there was a facade. Except me. I was the only real thing in that whole hall, and for that very reason, I was the one who bothered the most. I thought about leaving, get up, take the car and disappear. No fanfare, no farewell. Maybe never talk to anyone again. Let silence be my last response. Disappear on the road as those who have already given everything and now only want peace disappear. I thought about it strongly, and for the first time in many years, I wished I didn't have to wake up the next day. It's strange how a father's heart can endure so much and still beat, because at that moment I didn't feel angry. I felt loss, a strange mourning for someone who was still alive, but it was no longer mine. And it was at that moment, in that dark hole where the soul shrinks, that I heard. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the voice came again. Low, respectful, like someone who says the name of someone important without wanting to draw too much attention. Horridge T. Green. I looked up slowly. A middle-aged man in a sober grey jacket and watchful eyes stood there, holding a glass in his hand. Sorry to intrude, sir, but are you Horridge T. Green, the investor, the one who bought the first round of Alturian tech in '99? It took me 2 seconds to understand that he was talking to me, and 2 more to realize that that name, my full name, sounded inside with a weight that no one was expecting. I saw his eyes widen with surprise and respect. I saw his glass shake a little, and at that very moment, I felt the atmosphere change. But before I tell you what happened after my name echoed inside, I need you to understand something. It wasn't about fame. It never was. It was about dignity, about the silent value of choices that no one sees, about what you build without having to shout. And in that room full of jewels, what was missing most was exactly that, truth. Now tell me, what do you think happens when the truth decides to appear in a place made to hide? You're about to find out, because in the next few minutes, that marriage that seemed untouchable began to fall apart, and all because of a whispered name. It's him, Horridge T. Green, the man behind Alturian, and Lynx and Turner Burn. The voice of the man in the grey jacket grew naturally, effortlessly, as if each word carried the weight of a chip falling in each ear present there. The name echoed again, but now with a different tone, another rhythm, no longer as a mockery. It was reverence. Charles Whitman, that was his name, had been a director of one of Boston's largest hedge funds. One of those names that circulate in economic pages, but that few people recognize outside the market. But in that room, who knew? Understood everything right away. Because if Charles Whitman was standing there, calling an old man covered in icing Mr. Green with all that respect, it's because there was something much bigger behind that figure in the antique suit. The murmurs began, discreet but incessant. A couple next to her turned around, then another. People began to reach for their cell phones as if to confirm what they were hearing, and each click, each look, each whisper that was born, It was as if a layer of the party was unraveling. The guests, who had previously laughed at the groom's jokes, now looked around as if they were trying to understand if they were on the right side of the story. Brandon was still smiling, not realizing what was happening. He would shake a glass of champagne and say something to one of the groomsmen. But the godfather no longer laughed. He had his eye on his cell phone, his eyes widening little by little. And when he looked at me again, it wasn't the same look as before. It was no longer debauchery. It was a surprise and fear. I sat down, immovable. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. For the first time that night, silence was in my favor. Charles came to me. He held out his hand firmly. "Mr. Green, it is an honor to finally meet you. Your 2002 report on disruptive funds was the reason I stayed in business after the crash." I shook his hand calmly, almost without force. I just looked up and said, "Life teaches more than any report." He smiled, and he patted me twice on the back, as if recognizing a warrior. And that's when the quiet turnaround began. A lady who was at the table of the groom's parents stood up, came up to me and said, "Are you Horridge Green? I have heard a lot about you. My husband read all about his investments in Hensley Farmer." Another lady approached. A young man asked for a selfie. And then, little by little, as if the air had changed density, people began to move away from Brandon. Not in a theatrical way, but with the kind of care you take when leaving a contaminated place. Emily, from afar, looked at everything, with an expression that mixed astonishment, shame, and something that seemed like regret. She finally saw it. But was it too late? I didn't know. I just know that she couldn't move. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. This makes more difference than you think. Sometimes that's all we have, the chance to turn an old pain into a new lesson for someone. And if this story is messing with you, it's because the truth has the gift of touching where we hide it the most. I stayed there a while longer, still sitting, still covered in cake, but now no one laughed, no one scoffed. The difference was visible. The old man who was once a laughing stock, now it was the name that made the others rise from their chairs. And even then, I didn't smile, because it wasn't victory, it was just justice coming back to the surface. But do you know what surprised me the most? It wasn't respect, nor recognition. That's what came right after. When a waiter approached and handed me something that was not part of the script of that wedding. An envelope, and within it, a handwritten message. And that's when everything starts to turn, really. Can you imagine what was written there? Because the content of that note would change the course of the entire ceremony. Charles stood beside me, his hands clasped behind his back, like an old teacher about to start a class in front of an arrogant class that thought it already knew everything. He looked around with a faint smile, and in a calm, almost didactic tone, began to speak. "For those who don't know, this gentleman here is Horridge T. Green, one of the first investors in Alturian tech when no one else believed that technology could change the world. He also bankrolled the turnaround of Lynx Robotics back in 2004, and it didn't stop there. He was one of the silent partners behind the restructuring of Turner Byrne, the engineering group that today exports to more than 50 countries. I know this because I've been in meetings with your name on the table. Always present, always discreet." The hall, once filled with laughter and champagne, was now quiet and wide-eyed. No one breathed properly. Priscilla was pale, clutching her clutch as if she was going to faint at any moment. Eldon, his face tense, kept a locked smile, the kind that freezes when the mask falls. Brandon was sweaty-collared, looking around as if looking for a way out that didn't exist. A rat cornered at a party he thought he dominated. Charles continued unhurriedly. "Many here may have never heard that name, and that's okay, because Mr. Green never needed a stage. He never needed the spotlight. But if you have smartphones, fast internet, or have ever used banking automation software, Well, part of it has his finger, and not by chance, because he never invested in companies. He invested in ideas, in people, in visions, and he did it quietly. While others showed off, he made history. I remained seated. He didn't say a word. Because look, when the truth finally meets the light, it does not need to be defended. It stands on its own. And at that moment, what was once shame became a presence. What was once contempt has become respect. But not a rehearsed respect. It was the kind that is born when the lie can no longer stand. Priscilla, trying to regain control, stepped forward. But, so why did you never say anything? Why did you introduce yourself as anyone ordinary? The question came out almost as an accusation. I looked up and replied with the same serenity of someone who has seen a lot in my life. Because being ordinary has never been a shame for me. And because I wanted to see who would treat a man with respect without having to know his account balance. That's when her expression collapsed. Eldon cleared his throat, trying to change the subject. Brandon took 2 steps back, holding the glass so tightly that the glass nearly broke. And Emily looked at me as if she saw me for the first time in years. Not the simple father from a modest home, but the man behind it all, the one she never wanted to see. I didn't look away. Because I needed her to know. It was never about the money. It's always been about love and respect. I know that you who are listening to me may be wondering, but why didn't you say anything before, Horridge? Why endure silence for so long? And I tell you, because sometimes silence is the only test that reveals the character of others. And if you think that was the most remarkable part of the story, it wasn't. There's still more, much more, because after the truth comes out, you have to choose what to do with it. And that's when I made a decision that no one expected, and that would change the fate of that ceremony forever. Can you imagine what it was? Because what I did next, it silenced even the bells of the hall. After those words of Charles, the whole room seemed like another place. The laughter ceased. The eyes that had previously flowed judgment now avoided direct contact, and even the ambient music, which continued to play, sounded out of place, almost offensive in the face of what had been revealed. I remained where I was, unhurriedly, with the same napkin in my hands, already dry from rubbing my cake-stained face. And it was then that I saw the movement that surprised me the most. Priscilla Whitmore coming towards me with that trained walk of someone who has always thought that the world revolves around her own vanity. She had a cracked smile, one of those that hurt just to look at. She reached out carefully as if trying to glue together a porcelain that she herself had broken. "Mr. Green, we need to talk. I think all of this was a big misunderstanding. You know how the parties are, the stress, the nerves." I just looked at her hand and then turned my eyes to the glass of water. I didn't answer. I didn't even need to, because Eldon arrived right behind, trying to take control with the same disguised arrogance he had carried since dinner. "You see, Mr. Green, we know that we may not have paid enough attention to the Lord, but we really want to correct that. How about we talk in more privacy? We can go to the adjoining room. There's some good whiskey over there. I'm sure we can understand each other as friends." They surrounded me now, as if I were a valuable piece that they had dropped on the floor, and suddenly remembered that it cost much more than they imagined. And for the first time that night, it wasn't me who felt small. It was them, desperate, trying to save the facade, the status, the connections, because it wasn't just about me. It was about the risk of having humiliated a man who had more weight in that environment than anyone inside could imagine. Brandon, for his part, did not approach. He was standing in the corner, talking on his cell phone to someone. His expression had changed. She was no longer arrogant or debaucherous. It was pure affliction. The groomsmen surrounded him whispering, and one of the bridesmaids even discreetly removed her smudged makeup from laughing so much earlier. Now no one laughed. And it was at that moment, in the middle of this strange turn of the world, that a memory came to me. clear, sharp. Rachel and I at a picnic in Central Park in the late 1980s. She would take a sandwich out of the cooler bag and laugh at the awkward way I cut the fruit. So simple, so full of truth. I thought about how time takes everything but certain images, and how these images, as much as they hurt, are shelter. Sometimes in the middle of a storm, it is in an old memory that we find the ground. Have you ever felt that? Ever have you a memory that held you in place when everything seemed to fall apart? If so, share it with me in the comments. It just says, "I've lived it," or "I know what it's like." I'll read it. Because there are memories that are bridges between those who tell and those who listen. And this story, as personal as it may seem, belongs to many people. Returning to the hall, I realized that the tables had turned, and not for revenge, but for exposure. The truth was thrown into the center of the party like a lighted candle in a dry field. No one knew how to behave anymore. Even the DJ hesitated before changing the music. And Emily, he still didn't get closer. But the eyes, her eyes searched for me with a mixture of regret and fear, as if he was finally seeing the father he had forgotten to look at. And that's when Priscilla tried the last resort. "Mr. Green, what about marriage? Can we at least ensure that the ceremony goes on in peace? Everyone expects it." I smiled for the first time that night, but it wasn't an angry smile. It was the kind of smile that comes when you finally understand what you need to do. And without raising my voice, I replied, "You wait for the ceremony, but is my daughter still waiting for marriage?" The silence that came after that was louder than any music. And what I did next? No one there expected it. Because when a daughter is silent in the face of her father's humiliation, something needs to be undone, and the next person to stand up, it was not who you are thinking. Want to know who it was? Wait and see. I stood up slowly. I felt the weight of the years on my knees, but the firmness on my feet was different. It wasn't anger, nor thirst for revenge. It was just a clarity that comes when we have suffered enough not to have to prove anything else. I took a deep breath, adjusted my suit and walked towards the center of the room. The gazes followed me as if something sacred was moving. No one dared to interrupt. The talk ceased. Even the music seemed to fall silent, as if respecting the moment. I stopped right in front of Brandon, who was still sweating, now without disguising it. His eyes avoided mine, as cowards do when they lose control of their surroundings. I waited a second, then another, and then I spoke. "Brandon." Just the name, dry, was enough for him to raise his eyes. "You would have done that if you thought I was important." The question came without shouting. No hatred, only with the weight of the naked truth. And it stood there, suspended in the air, like a thorn stuck in everyone's throat. Brandon tried to open his mouth, but nothing came out, because he knew the answer, and everyone there too. The humiliation was not an accident. It was a choice, made with the assurance that the target was irrelevant, invisible, weak. But it wasn't. You thought you could laugh at me, push my face into a cake, because you saw me as a worthless old man. It wasn't the icing on her face that hurt the most. It was the contempt of months, the crossed looks, the fake smiles, their words measured so as not to say what they really thought. As if I were a piece out of place, as if I were a nuisance in your portrait. I saw Priscilla Winver at the back of the room. Eldon looked away. Emily, standing behind everyone, seemed about to cry. I spent my life teaching my daughter to recognize value in people, not titles, to look into the eyes of those who serve, those who clean, those who work quietly. I taught that respect is not bought, it is given. And ironically, I was treated as if I was worthless, exactly for following what I taught. But you know what hurts me the most, Brandon? It wasn't what you did in front of others. That's what I felt behind the scenes, a dinner where they laughed at my simple ideas, in the way they took me out of decisions, in the invitations that never arrived, in my daughter's request that I not talk about my life because it didn't seem to fit yours. And there was a pause. I could hear the heavy breathing of some guests. Others looked at the ground, embarrassed, some embarrassed inside. You didn't know me, Brandon. But even so, he decided to treat me as less, because in his mind it was safe, it was comfortable. But now that you know who I am, regrets it. That says a lot about you, but it doesn't say anything about me. At that moment, something changed in Emily's eyes. She stepped forward, small, almost shy. But I saw it. I saw the conflict in her, the guilt bursting from within, like glass breaking in slow motion. And that's when I understood that this wedding was not just about two young people in love. It was about choice, about values, about what we accept quietly, and what you need at some point to say out loud. I never wanted applause. I just wanted respect, and even when I was silent, waiting for someone to see beyond my old coat, no one looked. So today, here in front of everyone, I make it clear it is not about money. It never was. It's about dignity. And to know that, no matter how hard they try to hide you, the truth always finds a way to appear. I stared at him again. Brandon had moist eyes, but it wasn't regret. It was fear. Fear of everything I would lose now that the tables have turned. You didn't push me into a cake. You buried yourself in it. And now you're going to have to deal with it. Emily put her hand to her mouth. A sigh escaped the guests. A dense silence hung over everyone. But it wouldn't last long, because there was still a decision to be made. The hardest. And she wasn't mine. It was hers. My daughter. What would she do, now that she couldn't pretend she didn't see it anymore? Emily stood there, motionless. The impeccable makeup no longer hid what her eyes screamed. For the first time since it all began, she didn't look at Brandon, nor at his parents. He looked only at me, like someone who wakes up from a long dream and sees what has always been in front of his eyes. It was a look crossed by time, guilt, and love, silent love, which she herself had buried under layers of appearances, planned parties and custom-made dresses. I saw when she got lost. I saw when she started erasing parts of who was supposed to fit into the Whitmore's world. And now she saw herself in the dirty mirror of her own choice. She took a step, then another. With each step, the tension in the hall seemed to increase. The whispers ceased. Everyone wanted to see what the daughter of the humiliated man and the arrogant fiancé was going to do. And she came to me. He stopped a few meters away, the teary eyes, the chin trembling. For a moment she was once again that little girl with the shabby jeans and the backpack full of sloppy drawings. My Emily, the one that ran to my lap when the world seemed too big. But now, she was the one who had to decide whether to return home or stay where the mask weighed more than the face. "Father," the voice came out weak but sincere. She swallowed. I didn't know. Really. I thought I was doing it right. I just wanted everything to work out. The whole room listened. But at that moment there was only the two of us. I asked you to shut up, not to mention your life, as if your story wasn't worthy of my party. I let them laugh. I pretended I didn't see it. I was a coward. I looked her in the eyes, and I saw there the weight of regret. But more than that, I saw the lucidity, the awareness that comes late, but still in time to change what really matters. She turned her face slowly and looked at Brandon. He cringed in his own suit. "You made me believe that I needed to hide where I came from to fit into your life. You took me away from my father. You laughed at the man who taught me what love, sacrifice, and honor are. And I did. I let him." Her eyes went back to mine. "But I don't let it anymore." Emily then did the unthinkable. He took the ring from his finger, there, in front of everyone. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hesitate. He held out the ring to me. "I'm not going to marry someone who doesn't respect my father, because who doesn't respect where I came from will never understand who I am." Tears flowed. Mine were stuck as always, but my chest, that old chest that once carried so much, was filled with a kind of beautiful pain. The one that comes when we see that, even after so much blindness, love still knows the way home. The ceremony stopped. The guests looked at each other, not knowing whether to clap or remain silent. Brandon turned his back. Priscilla tried to pull her daughter, but Emily let go of her hand, and then, in the middle of that now divided room, she hugged me, strong, as if asking for forgiveness without needing words. But what no one expected was that this was not the end of the story. Because when a marriage is broken in public, what comes after reveals much more than the ceremony. And in that case, what came after, it was even more surprising. Want to know what happened to the green fortune? Because there, a new decision was about to change everything. Brandon, still pale in face and scruffy jacket, took 2 hesitant steps toward me, as if he still had something to say that could erase everything. Emily still held my hand, but he, with a trembling voice, blurted out, I didn't know who you were. I was told he was just an ordinary man. I didn't want to. It was just a joke. I would never have done that if I had known." And then he stopped, perhaps because he realized, too late, the weight of what he had just admitted. I took a deep breath. "Yes, Brandon, and that's exactly what says everything about you." His words hit the golden walls of that room like a shattered mirror. If I knew, that was the stark truth. He didn't respect people. He respected positions. And there, in front of 200 witnesses, this portrait came out of the glass picture frame and fell to the floor of reality. There was no scream. There was no scene. Just the silence of a man who began to lose everything without anyone having to touch him. The groomsmen, who had previously laughed loudly, began to move away. Some took off their ties and headed discreetly for the exit. One of Brandon's uncles patted him twice on the shoulder, not daring to face him, and left. The youngest bridesmaid, one Rachel if I remember, turned her back as if she didn't know him. And that's when I saw it. What he feared most was happening. It wasn't the scandal. It was loneliness. You know, there are things that we live and keep for years, swallow, pretend you forgot, but maybe, counting, we help another heart to breathe. Because there are a lot of people going through this right now, the pain of being treated as invisible, the fatigue of not being heard. If this story has touched you so far, enjoy this video, subscribe. It's not out of vanity, no. It is so that this report reaches those who have not yet had the courage to tell their own. We don't know the good that a story can do until it is heard. Brandon still tried. He still insisted. "Emily, please, it was a moment. I made a mistake, but..." She turned her face, and I saw it. I saw in her eyes that something had broken for good. It wasn't just confidence. It was the whole picture. The fantasy of a perfect, educated, fun, well-connected man collapsed in seconds, because in the end, the truth always comes. And when it comes, it doesn't need to scream, just exist. Priscilla tried to glue the pieces together. "Daughter, let's talk. Nothing needs to be that dramatic." But Emily was firm. "Mom, enough. You spent months pretending to accept Dad, but you always made it clear what you thought of him. And I did. I accepted. And now you will accept that it is over." Priscilla turned pale. Eldon turned around as if fleeing from his own image. And Brandon, already groundless, walked away, alone, the expensive shoes echoing through the now empty hall around him. What impressed me the most was that no one held him, no one tried to defend him. He left as he entered, certain that he was the center of the world, but now it didn't orbit anyone else. But what no one knew is that the real endpoint had not yet been written, because before I left that hall, I still had something to do, a detail that he kept in the pocket of his jacket, something small but capable of rewriting the course of a person's life, and I would only reveal when the time was right. And this time was coming. Emily took a deep breath as if preparing her heart before diving into a cold sea. I know this kind of breath. It's the same one she gave before she went on stage at school, when she was little, scared, but determined to go all the way. And there, with all eyes weighing on her shoulders, my daughter turned to Brandon. He still had hope in his eyes, a desperate, almost childlike hope. But all she had to do was raise her hand calmly, slide the ring slowly, and hold it between her fingers as if holding an old chapter, for him to understand. "Brandon, you showed me that the love you feel for me comes with conditions. Conditions of status, silence, submission. I was moving away from my father to fit into this mold that his family created. And today, I realized that every concession of mine was a betrayal of who I am." Her voice didn't tremble. There was no scandal, no spectacle, only truth. "I loved you, or I thought I loved it. But you can't share a life with someone who humiliates others to feel great. My father taught me never to turn my back on those who lifted me up, and I almost turned around. But I'm not going anymore." She held out the ring to him. Brandon didn't stretch out his hand. He had no strength. He stood there, as if the world were collapsing in slow motion. One of the groomsmen tried to whisper something, but no one paid any more attention. The hall, once gilded and full of promise, now looked like a wax museum. Everything standing still, beautiful on the outside but lifeless. Emily turned to the guests. "I apologize to everyone who came here for a wedding. I know you expected a happy ceremony, but sometimes the courage to stop something in the middle is the greatest act of self-love anyone can have. I'd rather leave here alone than enter a life where I have to hide my father." That phrase, it still echoes inside me, because I never expected anything like this. I never asked her to defend me. I just wanted her to remember who I was for her. And at that moment, she recalled, not with beautiful words, but with attitude, the most dignified I've ever seen come out of an altar. "You know, if you've been listening to me this far, let me tell you something from the heart. There are decisions that we don't make to win. Take it so you don't get lost." And Emily, at that moment, chose to meet. Not for me, but for her. And for everything she could still be away from that farce. There was silence, long, until one by one the guests began to clap their hands. Not those convenience clapping. They were small, restrained, but sincere applause. Applause from people who saw the truth in a place where they expected only spectacle. I remained quiet. My role in that story had already been fulfilled. I was the mirror she spent years avoiding, and now, finally, he had the courage to face it. Brandon left the salon for last. No ring, no applause, and without the surname he thought he could master. The bride left before him. But maybe you're wondering, what next? What happened to the green money, the silent fortune that no one saw coming, but that now everyone remembered? That's that. There was still a letter in my pocket, and she would change not only the course of that night, like my daughter's future. Want to know what I did to her? So just wait and see, because what's next? No one expected it. Neither did she. The hall was still full of muffled noises, but to me, it all sounded like when the tide recedes after the storm. There was nothing else there to hold me back, neither resentment nor pride. Just a deep desire to breathe outside that place. I looked around one last time. The crystal chandeliers, the marble tables, the orchid arrangements that looked more like monuments, and it all seemed small, disproportionate, an empty luxury, no roots. Brandon had left. His parents were silent. The guests were still trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed, and I just wanted to go back to my house, to the smell of the Saturday newspaper and the wet dirt in my garden. Emily caught up with me on the way out of the hall. She still had swollen eyes, but her posture was different, as if he had taken off a heavy coat that he didn't even know he was wearing. She stood in front of me, not knowing what to say, and I just smiled, calmly. I took her hand carefully, as I did when she was little, and crossed the street. "I'm where I've always been," I said quietly. "You had walked away." She nodded, and there, in that small gesture, we met again in a way that years of living together had not been able to before. We walked together to the door. The flashes of the cameras, the whispers, the looks. Everything was left behind. I refused the interviews, the late compliments, the invitations from businessmen and important people wanting to strengthen ties. "I don't do business at facade parties," I replied to one of them with a polite handshake. Emily and I crossed the garden of the Grand Whitmore Pavilion, past cars that cost more than my entire house, and headed toward my Toyota Camry, old but reliable. The silence on the way to the parking lot was more crowded than any conversation we could have. Sometimes love needs silence to bloom again. But if you think this story ends with the exit, the final point is still missing. Because inside my jacket, folded carefully, was an envelope. And in that envelope, it was the decision that I kept for 20 years. And that night, finally, it was ready to be revealed. The car followed the dark road, and the lights of the city began to appear in the distance. Hoboken has never looked so welcoming. Emily stared out the window silently, her eyes still full of unspoken questions. I felt in the air that kind of stillness that comes after confusion, when the heart begins to understand what the head is still trying to organize. When we arrived on my street, she smiled when she saw the garden lights on. "Do you still leave the balcony lamp on?" he asked, as if rediscovering an old habit. I replied with a light gesture, without having to say yes, that even when everything seemed far away, I never stopped waiting. We entered. The house was as usual, modest, neatly arranged, smelling of old wood and dormant coffee. The carpet in the living room was the same. The photograph of her with her mother followed in the same corner. We sat in the kitchen, as we did when she was a teenager. I put the kettle on the fire and let the water boil without haste. Emily broke the silence with a whisper. "Father, forgive me." I didn't let her continue. I just shook my head. "I made a mistake too, my daughter. I was waiting for you to understand alone, when maybe I should have spoken sooner." She held my hand. "But if you had spoken, maybe I hadn't learned." And there, in that sentence, I realized that she had come back. Not only physically, but really. Her look was the same as when she was little, curious, kind, present. We talked for hours. We laughed. We cried a little. We remember stories. The day she fell off her bike, the first trip we took alone, the time she brought a puppy hidden from school. Every memory seemed to have come back from exile, and with them, the truth of what connected us also returned. Not the money, not appearances, but the choices, and the love that, even hurt, had never gone away. I talked about Rachel, about how happy she would be to see her daughter rediscovering her own voice. Emily told me that for months she had been torn between two worlds, one that made her look strong, and one that made her feel at home. "But now I know," she said. "I don't want to pretend to fit in places anymore. I want to create my own spaces." And then I took that envelope out of my jacket pocket. I put it on the table. Emily looked curious. "What is this?" I took a deep breath. "Your name, the future, and a piece of our history that I haven't told you yet." She didn't ring right away. He just noted. "Dad, I don't need anything right now. Only you." I smiled. "I know, but maybe this here helped build what comes next. And if you've made it this far with me, know what was inside that envelope. It was not yet the end. It was the new beginning, and he would come up with one last decision, one that I have waited my whole life to take. Want to know what it was? So don't get out of there, because the next step, everything changed. That next morning, the envelope was finally opened. Not for me, but for her. Emily held the paper with a care that was not for material value, but for what it represented. It was a simple and direct transfer of all the shares and assets of the foundation that I created in secrecy years ago, with her name highlighted, not as heir to a fortune, but as guardian of a history. She read it silently. At the end of the page, a handwritten note, "Daughter, this was never about money. It was about criteria. And now it's yours." That moment sealed something between us that no lavish party could ever offer. The Whitmores went their ways, more discreet, less haughty. Brandon, I was told, left the country for a while. But it is not up to me to wish harm. What Emily rebuilt later, she built with her own feet. He set up a small community education company in Jersey, visited the house often, and from time to time he still asks me for advice, not about investments, but about people. And as for me, I follow here. In the same house, with the same plants in the garden, the same newspapers at the gate, and the same smell of coffee in the morning. But now with his heart at peace, because I understood that my mission as a father was never to protect Emily from the world, but to prepare her to face it without losing herself. The biggest lesson of this whole road, it's just that character doesn't scream. Character observes. Hold on, wait, and at the right time it imposes itself. Money only reveals who people really are, but it's the silence, it's the way we deal with contempt that shows who we choose to continue being. You can be left out, you can be underestimated, you can even take your face on the cake, but no one can take away from you the dignity of continuing to stand, clean on the inside, even if covered with icing on the outside. If you've come this far with me, listening to every bit of this story with an open heart, thank you very much. Really, it's rare to have someone to share these memories with. Each person who watches, comments, or simply feels together becomes part of this journey. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like there. For me, it's like a silent hug that says, I'm with you. And if you want to come back for another coffee another day, subscribe here to the channel. The house is simple, but the door is always open. Tell me in the comments which city you're listening to this story from. It's beautiful to see where these connecting hearts come from. And if you can, activate the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. And look, this story ends here, but there is another one right there on the screen. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.